Croatian heroines bravely endured terror and trauma, war crimes of rape, crimes against freedom, and disregard of the laws of the state and humanity. We thank them for sharing the truth. We thank them for their sacrifice, for surviving these evils to serve as witnesses. Thanks to their courage, everyone again speaks out in the hope that their tired voices will awake our conscience. They sacrificed for the freedom and independence of Croatia in wartime when Croatia did not have the power to protect them, and today when they struggle for recognition and justice. We are indebted to the victims and survivors.
Samo ljubav može spasit ovaj svijet.
At this, the 22nd anniversary of Serbian aggression against the Republic of Croatia, people around the globe remember a terrible war that shocked the conscience of the modern world by its deliberate carnage, primitivism, rape, and countless atrocities committed by the Serbian and Montenegrin army and Chetniks. No one can forget the images and reports brought to our attention by the media of Serbian concentration camps, Vukovar under siege, its civilians marched to their deaths, ethnic cleansing, mass graves, sex camps, tens of thousands of rape victims, the shelling of the medieval city of Dubrovnik, destroyed towns, villages, religious and cultural sites. Nor should we forget the courage of those who fought against Serbian evil and gave their lives for the freedom and independence of Croatia, and those who courageously endured torture and indignities of all kinds, and managed to survive. The Republic of Croatia, when it declared its independence in 1991, was immediately attacked by the Serbian and Montenegrin army. The aggressors carried out vicious crimes, deliberately targeting the civilian population.
Already in January 1991, Croatian women appealed to General Kadijević of the Yugoslav People's Army to amicably resolve political problems of the former Yugoslavia. In an appeal reflecting the mood of the Croatian people, 64,000 citizens of Zagreb signed petitions urging peaceful resolution of the conflict. 29 busloads of Croatian women traveled to the military barracks in Belgrade to demand that their sons be sent home in hopes that this would weaken the numerical strength of the army and thus prevent war.
This movie addresses the experiences and concerns of women, children, and men who were raped in the war and are still awaiting prosecution of their victimizers, still seeking official status as victims of war crimes, entitled to moral, spiritual, and financial assistance. The victims are alone in their suffering. The criminals are among us. Sunny was just 8 months old when she was trapped with her mother in the occupied city of Vukovar. She and her mother were held captive in an apartment where her mother was subjected to multiple rapes by Serbian soldiers. When Sunny's cries were heard by the soldiers, they hurled their heavy military jackets on her to muffle the sound of the child's weeping. Miraculously, Sunny survived.
I am Jacqueline. I lived in Vukovar. I was 18 years old in 1991 when the war began. My daughter was 8 months old. When Vukovar was occupied by Serbian soldiers, they kept me in an apartment there, alone with my daughter and my 8-year-old sister. After multiple rapes and torture, they took me to a concentration camp. They kept me, my sister, and my child there for many months. My sister and I were raped and tortured every day. We suffered terribly. They would rape me and throw their heavy uniforms on my small baby to muffle her cries. By some miracle, she survived. After being released from the concentration camp, I returned to Vukovar, where I lived for 3 years. But I couldn't bear to live there because friends of the people who tortured me in the camp threatened that my daughter would have the same destiny as me.
U sudskom procesu koji se vodio,
In the trial that took place against the perpetrators of war crimes, there is recorded the story of a mother, her 8-month-old baby girl and her 6-year-old sister, who were victims of war crimes. But no one else has responded to right that wrong. Until the crimes against the mother, her 8-month-old baby, and her 6-year-old sister are addressed, until the criminals who detained them with impunity are punished, it is not possible for Croatia to be a legitimate state, to be a member of the community of European nations.
We were forced to tie a white cloth to the gate of our house that indicated we were Croatian. I lived in my home with my mother, father, husband, and 9-year-old son. The Serbs entered our courtyard whenever they wanted. They did what they wanted. They mistreated us as they wanted. They took away anyone whom they chose. A neighbor threw a grenade into our garden and approached the house with the excuse that we had been shooting at them all day. They took us in our slippers to their military headquarters on Mount Peter. The soldier grabbed me. I begged him to leave me alone for the sake of my child. He said these words to me: "First, I'll kill your mother. Then I'll kill your father. Then I'll kill your husband. I'll leave you and your son for my pleasure." He raped me and left. I stayed in the room crying.
The rape, harassment, and abuse began in the camp in Sremska Mitrovica. They did it every day. I wasn't raped by Serbs who came from Serbia, Serbian soldiers, or Chetniks. I was raped by the Serbs from my own city, Vukovar, with whom I lived my whole life and with whom I had shared the good and the bad. After numerous rapes, they took me to a room for execution. There, I found my daughter with her 4-year-old son, my grandson. My grandson was taken away, and we have never seen him again. My daughter had to watch me being raped, and I had to watch the rape of my daughter.
Many Serbian soldiers stood in front of my house. When I stepped outside, I saw a neighbor and my father-in-law lying on the ground with the Serbs' rifles pointed at their heads. The soldiers said to me, "You haven't done anything to us, but you're guilty because you're Croatians." One of the soldiers told me to take off my clothes. I said, "Please don't do anything to me." He said, "Take off your clothes or I'll kill your mother-in-law and daughter." I couldn't do anything other than remove my clothes. He put his penis in my mouth.
When we talk about amnesty, I think first of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It says that anyone who rebelled against the United States or any state within the United States cannot participate in public service or act politically at the decision-making level of government. In Croatia, that is not the case. In fact, the reverse is true. People who were on the side of the aggressor, who held high positions in the occupying army, currently serve as members of the Croatian parliament. This sends completely the wrong message to the Croatian and Serbian public. Today, 20 years after the war began, we have Croatian citizens of Serbian descent who do not accept Croatia as their homeland. They advocate for Greater Serbia. Granting amnesty has done great damage to the establishment of interethnic reconciliation. It is unacceptable for people who were terrorists and members of the Serbian army to serve in the Croatian parliament and to direct their constituents in the same way they did in 1991.
There cannot be a peace agreement here which involves an amnesty for those who committed these crimes. That will be unacceptable. The weight of the evidence is going to be overwhelming. It will have its own momentum.
It was an unbelievable situation. We were truly in hell. We saw and lived through something you could never imagine in your life. What we experienced in Vukovar cannot be captured in any film. Out of the city's population of 40,000 people, only 15 remained in Vukovar. The rest escaped. We're not all equal courageous. The hospital lost at least 2/3 of the medical staff, and the brave third who stayed behind worked 24 hours. There were approximately 4,000 civilians and patients who came to the hospital to seek refuge and safety, and instead they found death. Whoever came to the hospital was transported to concentration camps and taken like lambs to the slaughter to Ovčara for mass liquidation. They kept me in the village of Negovslavski for 48 hours. I was at the mercy of anyone who wanted me. After that, I was transported to the concentration camp Mitrovica in Serbia. When I arrived, they placed me in solitary confinement, and immediately the walls began to echo with the horrifying screams of people experiencing waterboarding and electrical torture. Whines, cries, people pleading for their lives. Pure horror.
The village was full of Serbian soldiers and Serbian Chetniks, members of the Black Hand, a right-wing paramilitary group. They blackmailed me that they will rape my mother and sister if I did not satisfy them. They committed sexually perverse acts on me. They did unimaginable things to me. They humiliated me. They have made of me a monster. Today, I am mentally ill.
Serbo-Chetniks came to my home to arrest me. They saw me shoot them from the roof of my house and accused me of being a sniper. They said I would end up in a military court in Belgrade. Because I'm a Croatian, I had to put white cloth on the gate of my house, signaling to everyone that I was Croatian and free for the taking. I was forced to live with 4 Serbs. They raped me whenever they wanted. The Serbs said that all Croatian women have to be fucked so that they give birth to Serbian children. One day there were 8 of them. They put me through painful interrogations and then they all raped me.
The widespread systematic use of rape as an instrument of war by the Serbian army and Chetniks between 1991 and 1997 has been documented by the United Nations and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia.
One of the things that seems terribly important to me in this whole process is that at the end of the day, justice be done. Terrible crimes have been committed. Crimes against the city of Vukovar. Crimes against the Croatian soldiers who were in the hospital in Vukovar. Each individual there having the most horrible stories of what happened when the enemy came into their villages and rounded people up, destroyed homes, when neighbors went out and killed neighbors, raped women, killed children, rounded up men and put them into death camps. All these are crimes against humanity. They are violations of very fundamental principles of international law, and equally important, they go against all standards of human decency.
After the war and the establishment of a democratic political society, Croatian victims of sexual abuse did not gain recognition of their status as victims of war crimes. They are not recognized as such by society or by state institutions.
My street was predominantly inhabited by Serbs, so this part of the city was less shelled. Serbs had their wives and children seek safe haven in the Yugoslav army base when they were shooting at us. A Serbian soldier told me that my father was killed in the apartment. I went to the apartment and found my father dead on the couch. Above him, on the wall was written, "We Serbs killed your dad. This is Serbia." On his forehead, they carved "U." On his cheeks, the symbols for the Chetnik Army Corps. The next morning, I found my husband dead in the apartment. Then 2 Serbian soldiers put their hand grenades and Kalashnikovs on my table. One soldier ordered me to leave the room with the other after the first did his job on me. Then the second soldier took his turn.
When I walked into my house, 9 Serbian soldiers were there. Everything smelled of alcohol. They were all drunk and yelling like animals. Immediately, they stripped away all of my clothes, and I was naked in seconds. Countless hands started touching and probing me all over my body. They covered my eyes and nose with a cloth, and I began choking. They threw me to the floor. While one man held the cloth tight, they put their penises in my mouth. I lose my voice when I talk about it. When I lost consciousness, they threw me on a concrete slab. I don't know how long the rapes lasted. They committed perversions on me. 20 to 40 men. When they took me out in the backyard, I knew they would kill me. At that moment, I thought, "Dear God, help me." They pushed me and I fell to the ground. I heard a burst of machine gun fire and then another round. They yelled with pleasure like savages and left. They thought I was dead. I lay on the ground, stiff with fright, cold in pain. I lay on the ground petrified. They killed 17 members of my family. Now, whenever there is a celebration, none of my relatives are present. Their places at the table are empty and deserted. I have no words to express it. My husband and I had sown such love to everyone. We welcomed them into our home, and those Serbs repaid our kindness in such a way. This act of omission has resulted in the victims having to cope alone with their victimization. All of Croatian society, especially state institutions, must face the fact that officials were aware of the crimes committed, had knowledge of the crimes, but in 1991, 1992, and 1993 did nothing to address the problem. In the book Sunny, that provided the testimony of the raped women and men to state institutions and the international community, I reported violations of international law and the outrage of not granting these women and men the status of victims of war crimes. I warned against letting the criminals walk freely in Croatia and, of course, in the world, all to no avail.
On October 2nd, 1992, 3 Serbs came in to take us into custody, 1 local Serb and 2 from Serbia. I was taken to Serbian headquarters for questioning. In front of that building, my cousin was lying on the ground dead. His brain was oozing out of his head. After interrogation, they took me to the Velopromet concentration camp in Vukovar, collection of old hangars. The men were led away for torturing and killing. The women were taken to be raped. I started to cry and begged them not to. One of the Serbian soldiers said, "It's your choice. It's me or 10 others, and then we'll put you before firing squad." It was terrifying. I screamed and cried. Afterwards, my neighbor held my head while I vomited. After a few days, 3 other Serbians came, and they raped me every day. Every day.
6.11. On November 6, 1992, police in blue uniforms pulled up to our workplace, a veterinary station in Awaken. They took me and my colleagues to a military headquarters in Negoslavci. Among my colleagues were Dragutin Focic, Stjepan Juršić, Zvonko Juršić, Josip Juršić, and Mustafa Ibreljic. There, we were integrated one at a time. We were locked in the basement of the headquarters. We found a villager named Ante Korac. I didn't see what they did him, but I heard screams and cries. Another friend was carried out, covered in blood. They continued to beat him in a hallway with shelves. I was the 4th in line for interrogation. They were vicious. They mocked me. They beat me. They held a cattle prod to my neck. The commander who questioned me was named Ilya Petkovic. One of the interrogators was dressed in a military uniform. He said he was from Belgrade. His name is Borislav or Branislav Popovic. He and another young man, about 18 years old, a member of the Chetniks from Yugoslavia, raped me, one after the other. Dragutin Focic was later found in a mass grave in Vukovar, and the other 5, no one still knows where they are. They are officially designated as missing person.
The Chetniks took my family into custody. They did to us what they wanted. My Serbian godfather, who lived next door, did nothing to save us. Perhaps the only thing he did was to keep us from ending up in a mass execution, because no one else who came through interrogation came back alive. No one. Never. 15 of us were crammed into a truck, men and women. They transported us to the concentration camp in Mitrovica. As soon as we arrived, they jumped on us like rabid wild beasts. Men were separated to one side and stripped naked. We women were taken to room 14, where I was imprisoned for 1 month. I don't know how I survived it at all. The man who beat my sons and husband was named Marko Tsorevar. One of my sons is dead. The other has been declared missing. I am unable to live with all that happened. Every day I pass by the house where they tortured and killed people, where they tortured and killed my 2 sons. Every day I hear their cries and calls for help. How can I forgive those Serbs? I accept if God would like to punish me for that, but I cannot forgive them.
The UN estimates that between 20,000 and 60,000 women were raped by the Serbian military. In 2001, the Hague Tribunal elevated systematic rape from being a mere violation of the customs of war to one of the most heinous war crimes of all, a crime against humanity, second only to genocide. Sexual slavery and rape in armed conflict is now legally a criminal act against life and humanity. Amnesty International described the verdict as a significant step for women's human rights. In 2010, 20 years after the beginning of the war, Margot Wallström, UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, reported that only 12 cases out of the tens of thousands of rapes were prosecuted. As of 2012, just 40 cases were prosecuted by the Hague Tribunal and local courts. To date, there has been no coordinated attempt to create a database of these victims.
They collected many of us women on the street. The first woman had to carry a white cloth that symbolized to all that we were free for the taking for sex. They walked us through the city. They separated the men from the women, the children from their mothers. The city was full of dead people. They were killing people on all sides of us. It was a horror. There were passionate cries. People were killed in mass. People without a head, severed body parts all around, streams of blood on the road. A Serbian soldier said, "So, now you see what we have done today." Pregnant women had to stand while Serbian soldiers threw machetes around them. Everyone else had to watch. The soldiers raped me in the nursery. The first soldier was a homosexual. He did awful, perverted things that I cannot talk about. It is a disaster that has haunted me for years. I cannot even pronounce the words of what they did to me. They were dirty and disgusting. There were certainly 15 or 16 Serbian soldiers. They all raped me. One after the other, one after the other. It was awful, painful, and humiliating.
There were 102 people imprisoned in a cellar. They were brought to the building behind me one by one to be interrogated and tortured. I was ordered to bring them food. Among them there were 2 from the Penavic family, Drago Bartol, Marencic, Mato Mitrovic, and 2 members of the Jelinic family. The grandfather, who was born in 1916, was so badly beaten that his eyes fell out of his head. They beat him just because he was a Croat. The mother of Mato Mitrovic was slaughtered with a knife. She had her throat slit just because she was a Croatian. We found her remains behind the house. One day, many others were loaded into the truck and transported to a school. When I arrived at the school the next day to feed them, everybody was gone. They were all slaughtered. After that, I could never go back into the basement again. I cannot even look that way. I just walk by and still hear and see the people crying, screaming, beaten and bloody.
When they arrested me, they immediately started to beat me with the rifles, with their arms and legs. They transported us to a concentration camp like cattle. They chained us. The Manjača concentration camp was established by the Yugoslav People's Army. The guards and torturers were predominantly Chetniks from various parts of Serbia. It was winter, but they stripped us from our clothes, except our undershorts. We were beaten mercilessly every day. I was strung up by my feet from the ceiling with barbed wire. They doused me with water and they ran electric current through my body. They tied me to a metal bed frame, doused me with water, and again sent electric current through me. This was called the Russian method of torture. People who lost too much blood were crammed into trucks and taken to places unknown. They were never heard of again. Each day, they took me out and subjected me to torture, beatings, rape. They sliced me with knives and filled my wounds with salt. The hunger and winter cold were terrible. They threw us raw rice to eat. I ate roots and drank snow. If I came across snakes or rats, I'd catch them and I'd eat them alive. The atrocities, torture, slaughter, stabbing, whipping, whether drunk or sober. When I was initially captured, I weighed 165 pounds. When I was exchanged enemy prisoners, I weighed 59 pounds.
My fear was so great that I wasn't conscious of whether I was urinating or defecating. What encouraged me most was the voice of Radio Vukovar, the only radio station operating. Their reports comforted me and enabled me to endure. It gave us hope that the situation would improve. They encouraged us to remain courageous and brave. When the bearded Chetniks came, they lined us up against the wall. The streets were full of corpses. They collected them with bulldozers. The Serbian Major Šljivančanin told everyone that Serbs were immediately free to go home. Individuals who considered themselves Yugoslavs could leave in 2 or 3 days. Croatians, perhaps after a week, or never. As the Major spoke, Marian Ivanov, the informer, could be seen lurking in the shadows behind him. They made me collect feces with my bare hands. I was forced to drink alcohol, and then they raped me.
22 years after the crimes, Croatia is faced with the fact that the victims did not gain this status and that the criminals have not been punished. Under these conditions, civilized cohabitation is impossible. Today, 22 years after the war, we are still seeking recognition of their status as war victims and still seeking to bring the criminals to justice. With the help of the international community, we must accomplish this to allow us to develop into a modern democratic society. The victims contributed not only to the defense of our country, but to the establishment of the free, democratic state of Croatia. It is not and will not be free or democratic until it has the strength to demand justice, punishment, and compensation from the aggressor state, as well as a validation of the sufferings of each and every victim.
When I got out of the camp in 1992, I gave a statement to the court about my wartime experiences, about everything that happened to me. The court gathered evidence from 1992 until 2007. In that time, they apprehended only 2 criminals, and nothing has yet been decided about them. I have not received any satisfaction of my claims. I have been a victim of war crimes without any rights, no recognition of what I endured for all these years.
I did not return to Vukovar because the Serbs who killed, raped, tortured, and robbed us still live in that city. Not one of them has yet been held accountable for his crimes. When inmates of the camps gather each year to commemorate our suffering, Vukovar Serbs scornfully laugh and humiliate us. Those are still real Chetniks.
After I returned to Vukovar, I encountered one of my rapists. When he saw me, he froze. When I saw him, I froze. But I found my courage because I was in my own country now. I said, "How do you have the nerve to sit and work here after everything you did, from torturing people to raping us? The nerve." He has worked in the Vukovar City Hall for 12 years. I filed my lawsuit against him 6 years ago, and it still hasn't been processed. The police say that there is insufficient proof to file charges. I, who endured all of these horrors and tortures, am I not proof enough? My husband and I were walking in the city, and we encountered the mayor. He embraced us like friends, and I asked him, "Mayor, does that Chetnik still work in your office?" The Chetnik's name is Vlado Vezmar. The mayor stepped back, withdrawing his hands from our shoulders, and walked away without answering. Can you imagine that? Whose side is he on? My sons are gone, and the Chetnik is more important than my sons? My sons died fighting and defending Croatia, and the Chetnik has now been rewarded with a job.
All Serbs are cowards. They were horrible, yet when somebody files a lawsuit against them for these dreadful crimes, each of the Serbs has 4 lawyers who defend them. You see what animals the Serbs are? They still dream of a greater Serbia and want another war.
I returned to Vukovar in 1998. I encountered one of my rapists on the streets of Vukovar. On one occasion, I had an umbrella and I began to beat him and scream. He fled. After that, the police began an investigation. I provided the police with all the evidence of the crime. The fiends were arrested, but after just 1 week, they were released pending trial. Radi sold his house in Vukovar and fled to Serbia. Duchan, who worked as a police officer, was suspended from his job, but the union paid his entire salary as well as provided him lawyers for his defense. I saw him a few times in the city, but then he fled to Canada. I always ask myself, why did this happen to me? Now I know that I'm not the only one to whom this happened. Now I think that we have to be thankful to God that He kept us alive and that He gave us the strength to speak out and let the world know what happened here. A few days ago, I found out that my husband was raped in the Serbian concentration camp, along with other detained men. The world doesn't know anything about this.
I want to tell the whole world that we want justice. We want the truth to be told, and we want the criminals to be punished. These Serbian atrocities and crimes against civilians cannot, under any circumstances, be justified in the civilized world.
Our goals are to give voice to women and men who were victims of rape in the war in an effort to grant them the status of victims of war crimes entitled to every means of assistance and support, to bring the perpetrators to justice, and to challenge the worldwide practice of rape as an instrument of terror in warfare.
In the midst of the war, a 10-year-old child's prayer captures his desperate call from the heart for a return to peace and respect for human decency. It appears to the child that divine intervention is the only hope that the forces of goodness can overpower the forces of darkness.
Ja molim svim srcem svojim Gospoda nam sve ljude Hrvatske sačuva od smrti i pakla.
Molim te da Hrvatska sva sja u zlatu.
Molim da sva djeca budu sretna.
Molim te, Gospe, daj mome tati u selu da ne bude ranjen ili mrtav. Molim te, umiri srpski narod od prokletosti. Molim te, Gospe, pomozi mi.
I was in Croatia and Bosnia when the news reports came out about the rape camps and about the women who had been raped by the Serbs. And I remember accompanying a Western journalist, I won't mention the newspaper name, who did some interviews. And When he submitted his report, the newspaper would not publish it. In general, I recall during that time period very vividly that there was minimal coverage, except for a few newspaper accounts in Germany. The horrors of the women who were raped simply were not reported or picked up by the West. I would explain that as follows. The Croats and the Bosnian Muslims were, because of the propaganda that I talked about, seen as less than European, less than, if you will, white. And unfortunately, these kinds of things do matter. I think that the rape of white women in the West is something that's taken seriously. But when it is the rape or the mistreatment of women who are a minority, and what I'm saying here is that Croats and Muslims were depicted as a minority in that sense. It's invisible. It's not the fact of the rape occurring, again, it's the social construction, which is always through the lens and the filter of the Western prism, which unfortunately is ethnically biased. Yeah, the rapes that were occurring against Croatian and Bosnian Muslim women were part of an organized tactic of warfare. By that I mean, again, this is sociology and anthropology at work. By raping the women, the Serbs knew that those women would be treated as outcasts when they were reintegrated afterwards in their communities. And by causing this kind of upheaval in the family structure of those families, they would again weaken them, demoralize them, and make it easier to achieve a military victory. So I think we have to look at the rape not just as an individual crime, but as a military tactic of aggression.
22 years later, Sunny is a young woman. She now understands what was done to her mother and to her. Sunny is strong. She has survived the heavy burden of the enemy's jackets and abuses, and the crime of silence and suppression that continues today.
Stini svoju povijest piše, tom ne može niko prošlost da izbriše. Varaju se i ne misle tako, što se krvlju brani, ne pušta se lako. Ko na tvrdoj stini svoju povijest piše, tom ne može niko prošlost da izbriše. Mi smo tu odavna, svi moraju znati, to je naša zemlja. Tu žive Hrvati. Kroz vremena gruba i kroz ljute boje branili smo časno mi ognjišće svoje. Čuvaše nam pređi ovu rodnu grudu, nisu zbog slobode ginuli za ludu. A sad evo opet nova zora rudi, posli dugi lita Hrvatska se budi.